Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in and welcome back to the Gamesforum online. My name's John Speakman from Gamesforum and delighted to welcome to this week's episode some great guests. So we have Akshit, who is CSO from iion, Jamie, CSO from Manor Partners, and Sheetal, who is founder at Crikey Games down in Australia. So don't forget, viewers, that you can get involved and join the conversation while watching along with fellow attendees using the chat box to the right of the screen. On this week's episode, we're going to be discussing the latest thinking of brands as they increasingly advertise in mobile games, the lessons from Crikey Games' journey along the way, and the best formats for brands in mobile, using the expertise of Akshit and the team over at iion. So let's dive right in and let's start off with some introductions. So Jamie, if you'd like to tell us a little bit about yourself and your work over at Manor.
Cool. So hi, I'm Jamie. I'm the co-founder and chief strategy officer for Manor Partners. We're actually a three-part business. So one part of our business is brand consultancy. So we ostensibly write game plans for blue chip brands, the likes of kind of Samsung, Visa, PepsiCo, McDonald's, people like that. We also do experience design. So, for example, we build custom Roblox levels for brands, right from the kind of design aspect through to the development and delivery of those. And then the third part of our business is around value exchange, i.e. media. We're based in Singapore, but we've got people over in Hong Kong, over in London. We'll be expanding to North America in the coming months.
Exciting times. Actually, if you'd like to tell us a bit more about yourself next.
Sure. Thanks, John. Hi, I'm Akshit. I'm the Chief Supply Officer here at iion. iion has been around for about 10 years as a programmatic company. Last few years, we have focused exclusively on gaming. We work with publishers around the world to help them with the monetization. Primarily, we started off as a Google partner, but we started diversifying that by adding in a layer of programmatic demand. And at the back end of last year, we launched our platform, Immersion, which is the first self-serve platform that connects brands directly to gaming environments. And I think that's part of the reason why we're here to kind of talk about what brands want from gaming.
Absolutely. And Sheetal, if you could tell the audience a bit about your work at Crikey.
Yep. Thanks, John. I'm the founder of Crikey Games, a mobile gaming studio based out in Sydney, Australia. We develop and self-publish our own games, focusing more on hyper-casual games and moving towards hybrid casual as of now. Started in 2019, 2020, and then we moved, we have published a game with Crazy Labs in 2021, which is called Phone Case DIY, which is our most successful game on their portfolio, which is going to hit 250 million downloads very soon. And now we're focused on our own games, which is developed both on development side and marketing side. So we're focusing on our own internal tech stack, making sure we work with partners like iion for monetization, and working with all the want to make sure that the brands we get the brand exposure as well, so that we can build games mostly for brand specific games. So that's the key, and that's why we're here.
Excellent. And for maybe our more international audience, we've got viewers from kind of US, from Asia as well. Could you tell us a little bit about the name Crikey and where that comes from?
Thank you. That's a question. That's a very frequently asked question. So crikey is an Australian slang, which is typically, I can translate it to the word wow. So whenever you're surprised or you want to say wow, that's the people say, it's a slang that people use here, and they say crikey.
I love it. Excellent. So right. So yeah, let's start right away. And Jim, we're going to kind of focus this first kind of questions at you really, but why are brands increasingly engaging with mobile gamers? What are they looking for?
Well, I think it's first of all fair to say that brands really operate in a modern media environment in which both attention really like attention is kind of fleeting and really highly commoditized. And so more than simply making an impression, brands are looking for engaged attention, and that's where attention is really focused on a brand's content and messaging, as opposed to kind of eye baiting someone as they doom scroll on a social platform. So if you think about it, casual mobile games utilize ad formats such as rewarded video, and those formats actually score far higher than any other, specifically in this area of engaged attention. And so that's on the kind of macro side. Specifically, if you look at mobile though, mobile gamers also come with additional signals and therefore context. So they could have a high-end versus a value-conscious device. They could be in proximity to a retail environment, and also are increasingly likely to pay with their phone through mobile wallets and Visa Pay Wave and things like that. So mobile gamers make a lot of sense to a brand, both from a format perspective, but also from a signals perspective. And of course, it's ubiquitous.
We ran like a session 2 years ago, I think it was, kind of actually talking about the emerging brand thinking around mobile gaming, and it was still, there was still that kind of legacy attitude towards gaming in general. How do you think brands are having much more understanding about the mobile gaming market? Do you think that attitude has evolved, even indeed it has?
For me?
Yeah.
Well, I think you've got it in kind of two different areas, really. So you've got the kind of the reliance at the industry level, particularly on the media side, on syndicated research, and actually the fidelity of those research platforms such as Global Web Index. They really allow brands at a macro level to create things like audience profiles, then look at to the media and content behaviors. So, for example, we work with McDonald's across 5 countries in Southeast Asia. And what we do is we can use Global Web Index, or GWI, to understand the mobile gaming habits, even down to the titles they play. So we know what are the leading games for those audiences, just for 18 to 24-year-olds who eat McDonald's weekly. And so for a brand to get an understanding of the mobile gaming audience, I think actually a great starting point is large syndicated research platforms. And that is well within the wheelhouse of the agencies they probably already work with, such as their media agencies. Now, to do that in isolation be pretty dangerous. From our perspective, I think we find a lot of the aha moments really come from ethnographic research. And we always encourage our clients to get out and take public transport, because public transport is just the absolute best way in every country, in every culture, to find what people are kind of doing on their phones. And so a specific example in Singapore is we were talking with a Visa client here. They said, do people really play games on their mobiles? Like, are you kidding, on public transport? And that's what they're playing. And I asked her, so how often do you take public transport? She said, not really, like maybe a couple of times a week. I said, great, cool. So if you're getting on the tube, or as they call it, the MRT here, just peek over, just have a look at what's on people's screens. And she came back when we met next time, and she was absolutely gobsmacked. She just assumed that everybody was on YouTube or Instagram or something. And for her, it was a huge shock that the majority of the carriage that she was looking at were playing games like Candy Crush. And it really changed her entire perception of what mobile gamers are. She just thought they were kind of young kids playing kind of Call of Duty on their mobile phones. But what she realized is actually the people that they were trying to appeal to as a brand, they could be, millennials, they were busy playing games too. And so I think as brands begin to understand more about the market, they need to do so from a kind of a volumetric syndicated research perspective, but also they need to get into consumers and really understand what makes them tick and just see them in the wild and see what they're doing.
I really love that. That's a great way of kind of introducing brands to it. I mean, I'm sure we've all ridden public transport recently, and actually you do notice the diversity of the mobile gaming industry. And when we work in it, sometimes we take that for granted, but it's actually pretty cool when you do see just the difference in who actually plays games and the games that they're playing, of course. So what's your perspectives about how do brands kind of understand your games, and how has that relationship work for you?
That's for me. Yep.
Yes.
Yes. I think he was Jamie was spot on in terms of the education that is needed. Like Jamie was one person telling to another person that this is what it is when it comes to game. And I think the market education is lacking because the brands are behind an agency, and agency have to keep educating the brands, saying this is the population, this is how many people are using, and it has to be data driven. And again, there needs to be tools and platforms in between the agency and the game itself to provide the necessary information that the brand is looking for. How what is the viewability, what is the engagement rate, what is the CTR, and why games rather than any other ad format, or whether it's a TV or an OTT platform that they've been advertising with. I think the education that Jamie was mentioning, I know he did one-on-one, but I think at a more higher level is necessary, is what I feel. Because the market has moved. We have to move away from, the audience has moved from a TV to an OTT or a mobile right now. So the platforms also have to support that, and the brands also have to move accordingly to where the audience is.
So why do we still think there is that hesitancy? Is it just lack of education? Because games have been mobile games especially have been banging the drum about the kind of brand engagement. We've seen success stories, with wider cross-platform titles, thinking Roblox, thinking Fortnite, where they've had huge kind of brand engagement and success stories. Why do we think there's still that hesitancy? Actually, what's your perspectives on why brands, we don't see the same spend in brands that we might see in performance?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we were looking at some research which said that I think ad spend per user is still half of TV, when if you look at the total audience size worldwide in gaming, it's equivalent, if not getting bigger. So I think partly, Jamie and Sheetal kind of covered it, is that understanding that, your users that brands want are now available in gaming environments. So, it's not like gamers. Like I was talking to my mom the other day and I'm like, Mom, you're a gamer, you play Candy Crush. So it's not, it's I think that's the first step, is just making sure that they understand that it's the same audiences that are watching Netflix. And, people who watch Netflix aren't called viewers. So people playing games are not necessarily gamers. It's everyone. And I think brands do understand that. They've started recognizing that over the last few years. And I think COVID especially accelerated the boom in kind of gaming as people started playing more and more. But there's been hesitation, I think, in terms of, number one is understanding there's a lot of fragmentation in the industry. There's a lot of different types of games. There's mobile, hyper casual, casual. And I think a lot of brands didn't understand necessarily the power of hyper casual and mobile games, that more people are playing mobile games compared to, it's not just AAA, it's not just console, it's not just PC. And it's the same player playing all three types of games. So, you can target the same person playing a hyper casual game who might also be playing a AAA game. So that's, I think, one of the first things to try and educate them, that the power of mobile games is as high as other formats. And then obviously there were concerns around things like measurement, how do we measure success? What kind of things can we do? Is it scalable? Is it reliable? Especially for in-game formats, can we kind of, can we kind of accurately measure what the thing is? Because I think they had always associated mobile advertising with performance-driven campaigns, rather than what we're talking about is top-of-the-funnel awareness sort of campaigns. And now that there are metrics and all that we're able to bring into these environments, I think brands are being more receptive to trying these out. That's the perception that I have, at least. Jamie and Sheetal could probably speak more to
that. So, yeah, I think, Akshit, I think you said a couple of things that really stood out to me. One is around the definition of a gamer. And you're absolutely right. It really resonates with me when I think of, I spent 15 years in media, and at no point did we ever target TV watchers.
Yeah.
It's just, It's not an audience definition. So for me, that really resonates. And absolutely, I'm seeing the year of mobile, which is hilarious to everybody who's been in the year because it lasted a decade and it's still going. I've seen the absolute same kind of market dynamics in place. So we've seen just a complete mismatch between brand spend and consumer attention. And that will change. That will change quite dramatically. I think one of the things that comes up again and again in my conversation with our clients is, and there was one that stands out for me that I had with somebody who was very senior at PepsiCo. And she said, hey, look, we find the idea of connecting with players a bit intimidating. And she said it's because if you get it wrong, you get told about it. They're highly opinionated, highly vocal consumers. And I think that absolutely that's true. And you better be on point with your messaging and have a meaningful kind of value exchange built into the campaign mechanics. But that's, I think, why you need players at the table and represented in those conversations as opposed to, them being represented as a target audience. And so I think that there's very clearly an opportunity to address quite a lot of gaps. So the gaps are, from my perspective, consumer attention versus brand spend. They should broadly be in alignment. If you look at the trajectory that Facebook took on, then you'd see it took about a decade for it to begin to match. And we're in that same kind of nascent stage right now. So it's going to be explosive over the next decade. So that's really exciting. The other gap is, I think, around messaging and making sure that we remove the kind of intimidating aspects of connecting with this audience, which may be new to many brands. And we do that by bringing the target audience into the conversation with the brand and making sure that the audience is represented in that conversation around both the strategy, but also the ideation, making sure that it will actually resonate with that audience.
What does that look like on a practical level? You bringing players to the brand? Yeah, so a lot of the work that we'll do, whether it's as an agency or as a consultant or a publisher, is always communal, right? So we do a lot of social work. We do a lot of work in meeting rooms. So how do we bring members of the community actually into those environments? How do we bring them into the kind of setting of a meeting? And make sure that they've got a clearly defined role and they feel comfortable in that context and they express themselves truthfully. So when I think about the best way to affect that and to practically make it happen, it's exactly that. It's making sure that we're recruiting members of the community, people who are going to be playing the games, who are within the brand's target audience. We actually bring them in and make sure that they are participating meaningfully as part of the campaign activity. And even better, if they're not just a member of the community, but a meaningful member of the community, such as a creator or a key opinion leader. And that way, you know that you've got kind of amplification built into the design of the campaign as is. So how's, from Crikey's point of view, do you have like engagement level conversations with brands or through agencies like Jamie? How are you kind of helping to introduce brands to your games?
Yes, I guess, I think just going back to what Jamie just said, it's getting into a conversation at a very early or nascent stage with the brand, and then build the game while we are making our pipeline for the next 5 games that we have to release in 2023, 2024. We need to be in touch with the agency saying, these are our games. How do your brands fit in here? And, these brand contracts are usually 1 to 3 years anyway, right? So you can combine these two. Like I would say on the other side as well, right? The agencies can work with mobile gaming studios and say, okay, these are the brands that we have. What can you do? Right? Like, for example, a Nike, or an Adidas or a jacket or a Gucci jacket. So then we at an earlier stage, while we are ideating for a new game, whether it's a strategy game, simulator game, and then keeping the brand perspective, keeping the brand in mind, we can think about innovative ideas, which we can, both of us, the agency and the developer, can present to the brand, saying these are the things that we would like. And yes, I'm aware of, how brands are very skeptic about the gaming, but if we can present it in such a way that it's not overwhelming, but it will still have those engaged audience, which they're looking for, and the eyeballs that they're looking for. We are still promoting it as our game, but we'll have like, a Gucci jacket, which they can get it as a reward, or in exchange of some points, or if you complete level 15, you'll get a reward of some kind, or different skins. Or if you're looking at a car brand, you can look into a car simulator kind of a game where you are designing a car from scratch, and you can have a logo from them. So I think getting involved at a very early stage with a gaming studio and working hand in hand is I guess the right way of looking into this.
I mean, that's a strikingly forward-thinking approach in terms of actually how the level of engagement with the brand and involvement within the game itself. From your point of view as a publisher, why are you so keen to have a brand relationship rather than kind of relying on the more traditional performance campaigns, performance monetization, traditional monetization methods that has, well, not to put too fine about it, has dominated the industry for the past 5-10 years?
Look, the brand definitely helps in terms of marketing, in terms of PR as well, and getting higher eCPMs in terms of that. The monetization side, and that helps us more, to spend in marketing. So overall, I guess, an overall experience of the user, instead of seeing like an intrusive ad from an ad network for a performance ad, a branded ad would make much more sense in the user experience, great, especially if it's very, very targeted to what the game is.
Okay, I think we absolutely need to dive into player experience and what players do think a bit more about brand relationships, brand advertising within games. But just on the point about for publishers as well, actually, I want to kind of ask you this as well. You've got relationships with many publishers. Why do you think there is this kind of developing demand as in bringing brands into mobile games?
I think demand is the right word, actually. I think with publishers I speak to, there's a lot of things happening in the industry where they keep seeing rising CPI costs. User acquisition costs are going up day by day. Over the last few years, they've seen, especially after the boom in COVID, a fall in CPMs generally, which is always been a concern for them. So they're eager to have fresh budgets coming into the ecosystem. They're eager to kind of drive those CPMs up. And I think with brand dollars, it's perceived as a way of kind of direct dollars coming into the gaming environment, into their games, which will then hopefully lift those CPMs, as well as a lot of the things which kind of Sheetal mentioned in terms of prestige, in terms of innovation. It also helps with the user experience. Like a great example, recently Call of Duty and Heinz did a great campaign where they had a snack corner where, because in Call of Duty, if you kind of pause, you can get killed. So they had hidden corners where a user could take a break, have a snack. So, these kind of associations also sit with the users, increase longevity in the games of the users, help with user retention. So I think for publishers, it's a case of they themselves are thinking more about strategy. I think earlier Sheetal also mentioned hybrid casual. I think the hyper casual publishers are now thinking more about hybrid casual. So, they need to strike that right balance between ads, a user experience. So they just don't want to, rewarded video interstitials will always remain a very important part of the monetization strategy, but they need to add to that. And, in-game, for example, is a non-intrusive format which comes into it. And that's where, we believe that brands are specifically interested in this stage. Also in the other formats, but especially in these kind of formats. So I think they want to diversify, at least that's the feedback I've got from publishers. They want to diversify their monetization strategy and strike the right balance between UX and monetization. And this is a great way to do that.
Yeah, so actually the example that you just brought up, I think is a really interesting one for Call of Duty and Heinz, because in theory, these two things should not mix.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
It's like when you think of Call of Duty, you don't think of Heinz. You think of something like an aggressive
Correct.
like energy drink brand, right? And I think for the audience for this webinar, it's really important to understand that fundamentally, not all publishers want to work with brands, because the monetization strategy of different types of publishers is entirely different. So for example, Call of Duty, I think there's one brand that got into the game and it must have cost them an absolute arm and a leg. And it was Burger King. I can't see any other brands that have managed to get in there. And that's because that game monetizes its consumers really, really well. It's a bit of an old school monetization method from the get-go, insofar as you have to buy the box. Like you buy a download, like $100 to buy the game, and then they'll monetize you at a seasonal level. So every few months they'll push a new season. There'll be content drops peppered throughout. There'll be opportunities in the store to personalize your experience, such as, you know, the clothing on your character and things like that. I say this because I play a lot of Call of Duty, and Activision have definitely taken a lot of money from me over the years. But one of the top mobile gaming publishers we work with in this region is Garena, right? So Garena, for many years in Southeast Asia, published League of Legends on behalf of Riot Games. And they've been publishing their own games since. So for example, Free Fire, which is absolutely huge in Latin America and in Southeast Asia, is one of their titles. And they won't allow advertising in it, but they allow partnerships. And that's a really fascinating blend of the two. And it comes back to what you were saying before around the increasing pressure they've got on UA costs and CPI, so like cost per installs. And what they've done really well is, and one specific example comes to mind, work they did with Maybelline, the beauty brand. And what they did is they licensed the IP to Maybelline around character art and logo. Maybelline then went and made custom limited edition products in custom packaging that was made available through e-commerce. But almost none of it was actually in the game itself. It was all outside of the game. It was licensed IP. The only thing that was in the game was a prompt in the loading screen of the game to tell you that this thing existed. And if you're interested, go and kind of click through and find out more. And so I think we all need to understand that different publishers monetize their audiences in different ways. On the one end, you've got kind of hyper casual, and in the majority of cases, it's actually an advertising only model. In some cases, you've got kind of blended in-game and advertising. On the other end, you've got, you know, some AAA games who are selling a box, a disc, or a download, and then they'll probably do some microtransactions on top, such as DLC packs and things like that. These guys won't let you in the game. These guys will kind of bend over backwards to allow you in the game, but probably in quite structured ad slots. And I think what's really interesting is the likes of Garena, who are beginning to kind of blur the lines between what is out of game as an experience and in-game as a prompt to launch that experience. And one of the most beneficial aspects to that campaign, if you talk to the guys at Garena, is the fact that the brand Maybelline spent so much in media. So they spent a lot in Facebook ads with original content. They spent on like bus stops and billboards and things like that, really pushing this collaboration and this partnership. And so what it did is net drove lapsed users back into the game and drove new users into it, which obviously set up a total win-win between the brand and the publisher in this case. But totally novel, you know, totally kind of new and emerging way to work that unfortunately is totally unstructured. So all of that is a really manual process and involves a lot of work sitting down with people like Sheetal and going, how do we do this meaningfully? How do we add value to the players of your games as a brand within this given category? Like, how can we come to the table and add value here?
And Jamie, how did you go with the measurement side? Was there any analytics or tracking in place?
Yeah, all of it. So yeah, we were lucky enough to actually work on that, and we did everything from brand tracking. So we recruited a cohort of people who had been exposed. We saw their pre-post in terms of the perception of the brand, the propensity to purchase of the brand and things like that. Because there was an e-commerce component, there was also a link between the brand's own customer data platform and the game platform. And so you saw a game ID linked to the purchase. And so net, you're able to work out not only the cost per impact on brand score, but the cost per sale, and then the final value of the total partnership together.
Right.
Really sophisticated, really good stuff.
It sounds like as much as the brand's choosing the game, it should be the publisher as well choosing the brand as well to get that kind of that win-win relationship, ensuring that both sides are getting something out of it rather than being more of a transactional relationship. Okay.
I think it's the agency and the developer working together to pitch to the brand.
Okay. What other kind of advice would you give, Sheetal, in terms of publishers wanting to work with brands? How, if there's someone who's really approaching this from with a blank slate, you mentioned obviously kind of working with an agency. How did you kind of start that relationship with Jamie, with the brands that you're working with?
Look, I guess, taking the example which Jamie mentioned about McDonald's and in the Southeast Asia region, right? So given that's the client, we can come up with like 4 or 5 different, concepts for McDonald's of how we can build a game around McDonald's, whether it's a strategy game or whether it's a hybrid casual game where you're kind of building McDonald's from scratch. You have an open land and you're building McDonald's. And then once one McDonald's is up and running, you are building a new one in a new city and so on. So you can keep expanding. And I guess coming up with 3 or 4 concepts and presenting it to the client together so that we can answer their questions. And again, measurement would be a very important aspect here for them to understand how we're going to track, what is this for me, how many users can you get. So I guess working together from scratch, presenting the client with few ideas and, brainstorming together from brand perspective, from the agency perspective, and what we can actually do in the game, because sometimes we kind of lost in translation. What they want to do technically is not possible. So if everybody sticks together, puts their head down, I think it's a win-win situation for all of us.
Jamie, any lessons you would like to, or advice you'd like to share with publishers?
Yeah, I mean, I've actually worn both hats. So I've been at the agency on the receiving end of many kind of publisher pitches, and I've also worked at a publisher. So I understand the challenge here. I think fundamentally there's 2 things. So one, if I was a publisher wanting to go and work with brands, I would first and foremost establish reciprocity. So you've got to be willing to get in there and teach before asking for any form of investment from the brand. You've got to be in there like teaching them about players, about the challenge and the pain that players go through. And then the second aspect is linked to that. It's be prepared to be the voice of the player. So if you, as the publisher, think that the brand's ideas are too intrusive or aren't additive to the player experience, it's actually your job to say that. And similarly, it's your job to help the brand to do activations which will actually resonate with your audience. So it's easier if you've got a slate of games. So like, if you're Subway Surfers, it's easier for you to come to the table and go, the thing that really resonates with my players is when we do an activation that looks like this. It could be a location-based thing, it's time-based, and the reward is this sort of thing. As a brand, how could you come to the table and kind of fill those slots? We've thought ahead, and we think that you could do this. Players would love to see you doing this, and here's what that looks like as a program. That's the sort of initiative that I wish that more publishers would take. And also, this is a very controversial thing to say, especially from someone who's ex-agencies, but I think publishers should be going directly to brands where possible. And that's because by and large, most agencies actually do not understand gaming. They understand media placement. And so your game will always be viewed as a media placement, spots and dots, and valued as such. Most traditional media agencies don't understand things like sponsorship and partnership very well. And so they don't understand the additional value that's created by association between your IP, i.e. a game, and the kind of emotional resonance it has with an audience who are fans.
Really interesting viewpoint.
Interesting.
Okay. So actually, you kind of obviously operate linking the brands to the games themselves. What are your thoughts on how publishers need to prepare their games themselves, the product themselves, and what are the right formats for brands to become part of that environment?
Sure, that's a great question. I think some of it, I think, kind of Sheetal kind of touched upon is thinking about placements. For example, when you're developing the game, talking especially about in-game intrinsic ads. So the good thing is IAB is now defined around the game, in the game, and away from the game as 3 separate categories. So, traditionally your interstitials and all are around the game, which is when there's natural breaks in the game, and then in-game is part of the gameplay, and then away from the game is, sites, etc., that talk about gaming. So, that's kind of like the full funnel approach that we're talking to brands about, that you got to target all of these. And I think publishers also need to start understanding that look, we need to try new formats, we need to try in-game, we need to try audio ads, see how that works. Knowing your game is important. So a puzzle game, for example, you may not be able to try an in-game intrinsic ad, but you could still kind of think about audio ads, right? Like, your kind of audience. And also knowing that if yours is a puzzle a game, for example, in-app purchases are not likely to be high on the agenda. So you need to be more ad driven. So I think if you do, number one is to understand your appetite to try in these new formats. For example, we work with both formats. So we work with people around the game, which is traditional, and publishers are very open to that. They're like, yeah, let's do it. Let's test it out. Let's do it. When we start talking about in-game, they are a bit more hesitant. They're like, oh, are the fills there? Is it going to work for us, etc. And our advice always is we got to try it. Until you try it, you're not going to know, because it's also relatively new. We're all learning, as we go along. Brands are learning, publishers are also learning. So I think, and there are some publishers who are very open to it because they think of it as an additional revenue stream. It's not, cannibalizing what you already have. You're creating additional revenue. So you can't compare it today to what you're earning from around the game, because that's been around for a long time. There's a lot of dollars behind it. It's kind of like a working model. This is still relatively new. So, you got to think of it that, okay, this is additional revenue that I'm going to get and it's going to work for me. And that's the first step. And then the smaller things publishers can always do, right? I think because try to understand and engage more with brands, what they're looking for. They're looking for brand uplift. They're looking for brand safety. If you can you can't control all of this, but whatever you can control in terms of avoiding controversial content, etc. Those are the kind of things that they want. If, for example, you have a community angle, can you kind of feed that a little bit more, spend a little bit time more on your community website? Because again, that gives brands more opportunities to engage with the audiences across your formats. There are certain SDKs, which, for example, I won't get into detail, but, the open measurement SDK, the IAB has, it sends signals to brands in terms of viewability metrics, etc. These things are all things to educate yourself on at this stage and see what works for you. And I think that is a great start for publishers to start taking today, because over the next 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, I can just see brands funneling more and more dollars into the genre. And the publishers who start preparing for it now will be in the best position to kind of take advantage of it.
Interesting. Jamie can actually kind of touch a bit about it, viewability and the engagement with the audience, but do brands evaluate success in different ways, or is, it is obviously very much linked to the campaign objectives, but how are your kind of the brands that you're working with? How are they really kind of measuring the success of their campaigns themselves?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to understand there's kind of 3 layers to it, because we talk about partnership and without giving a good definition to that, I think it can be a little bit amorphous. So I think we need to think about it in terms of, are we talking about ad placements, sponsorships, or a partnership? So ad placements are kind of invariably going to be assessed using comparable media metrics, like, looking at the input and the outcome points. So an input could be a CPM or an eCPM. An output or an outcome could be a CPA. And so I think if you're looking at the kind of media end of things, that's the way it's going to be judged. And that way you can do a fair apples to apples comparison for a lot of the in particular casual in-game formats against other formats on kind of the open web and within social platforms. Now, if you look at a sponsorship is going to be measured, and we always encourage that to be done via a third party like a Nielsen or Shikenzo. A sponsorship will be measured in a way as to understand the impact of association on the brand itself from that fandom. So you're looking at things like perception shift, brand value shift, and you can measure as far as propensity to purchase. That's not a problem as well. So you've got these two layers so far. We've got kind of placement level, very kind of media transactional. You've got sponsorship level, which gets in under the kind of emotional skin a little bit more. And then you've got real partnership. And a partnership will have probably components of both media metrics and sponsorship valuation principles, but there'll also be a direct commercial impact. So this would be much closer to the business goals and have a shared success component. So it could be, for example, unlocking a new cohort of consumers for the business, and it could be unlocking a new set of players for the publisher. You're probably looking at points of shared CRM at that point. So you've got a customer data platform that you're probably both using, and you could feed data into that. It could also be looking at ways to extend the brand into new categories or territories. And then you may even have shared sales data. And so what you've seen is, that is a very kind of surface level to, yep, we're touching people emotionally, to, wow, we're really in a business partnership here with mutual positive outcomes. And I think those are the kind of three levels to assess any kind of real partnership through.
So I think we're just about out of time, but sorry, excuse me. One final question for you all, actually. I suppose it's a bit more forward thinking, but what do you think are the lessons that still need to be learned with brands' involvement with mobile games publishers? We're all jumping on this one straight away. So actually, I'm going to ask you for your answer first.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. Like, I still feel, as I said, I still feel we're in the very early stages of in-game intrinsic ads, especially. So I think a lot, it'll be interesting to see how publishers, looking at it from the publisher perspective, because that's who I deal with mainly, how publishers kind of form that balance between in-game and what we call around the game. I think going forward will be very interesting. Is it, as, right now, like, paralleling back to, I come from the programmatic world. There used to be fixed placements, and then programmatic came into the place, and programmatic was small and fixed placements, and then it started going this way. Is that what we're going to start seeing with in-game as, users, how do users respond? Are they going to respond positively? Are we going to see CPMs increase as brands start funding more dollars? Of course, we're talking about a few years down the line here. It's not going to happen overnight, but it'll be interesting to see how that balance, I think, from the publisher perspective kind of takes shape. And I think that is probably, for me, one of the biggest learnings still in terms of how that goes about. And a lot of that will come down to how well we're able to measure success for brands and how much value brands are able to derive from these new formats. And I think that's probably what we're trying to solve for at iion. And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Jamie?
So I've got an answer here that is in three parts. So I think one of the things that resonated with me earlier in the conversation is the expression gamers as an audience definition, and it keeps coming up. And at this point, we're talking about 3 billion consumers who play games. It's not a homogenous stat. Every audience that you can possibly imagine, from kind of high net worth to mums with kids and everything in between, can be found playing games, right? And those games will range from kind of Wordle to Candy Crush to shooters to driving games, and there's a whole kind of spectrum of different games out there. So fundamentally, I think one of the takeaways is that gamers isn't an audience. That's one of the lessons that needs to be learned really quickly. There's definitely the right audience for a brand and the right environmental kind of context to be found in the plethora of games out there. The second part for me is I feel very strongly about this, that attention shouldn't be bought. It really needs to be earned. And that's the idea that if you want something from a player, that could be attention, it could be an identifier. We have to be thinking about what we can give them back. So that could be something in game or out of game. We just need to think value exchange for a fan over buying impressions against an audience. And so that begins to take the kind of discussion in terms of value and the language around that slightly away from media. And I understand the requirement to talk in media terms in most cases, but I think we need to start to move away to kind of more meaningful metrics. And actually, I think rewarded video in games like Angry Birds is a great example of this. So your character dies, or you watch a rewarded video from a brand for one more life. And the player receptivity to these types of formats is absolutely off the charts because the value exchange is so explicit. And then the final thought I have around this actually is off the back of just the previous conversation that we were having around partnerships. And I really do think we need to be thinking in terms of partnerships over just placements. And so I think that a brand needs to understand that their fans are valuable too, and that they can actually come to the table by connecting the publisher with potential or lapsed players who are fans of the brand. And a great example of this is what Mountain Dew did a few years ago now, but they were working with PUBG, a very, very popular and particular mobile title across South and Southeast Asia. And they said, hey, look, tell you what, your PUBG, you're played by all of these Gen Z kids. We want to connect with them in a meaningful way. How can we do so? And PUBG said, hey, we've got a constant problem of acquiring new users. So why don't you work with us on that? And what Mountain Dew came back with is, hey, well, we've got fantastic relationships with 7-Eleven. And so what they did is they wrapped all of their fridges across 7-Eleven, across South and Southeast Asia. And the value exchange that was established was, a consumer would buy a product, that they purchase the product, and then they'd get rewards into the game linked to their player ID. So the brand got the association with an incredible IP. They got the positive association of that, but they also got device IDs and player IDs off the back of it. They collected a lot of data. And of course, if you're Tencent, who is the publisher for PUBG Mobile in this region, they are beyond happy because they've connected with all of the people that have been in and out of the 7-Eleven across South and Southeast Asia, which is far greater than the player base of the game. So that was a really good lesson in kind of setting up that mutual kind of value exchange between the publisher and a brand. And so therefore, I think that third point is really around, we do need to think about partnerships and not simply just placements.
Awesome. And Sheetal, the final word to you.
To me, I guess, I'm just going to go back to what Jamie just mentioned. It's not about the users or eyeballs or audience. I think from the brand perspective, it's all about the looking for engaged audience. I think it's not just looking for like a billboard somewhere, right? They're looking for people who have realized that this is Gucci. They actually want some kind of engagement with it, or they want to go to action with it. And I think the more the agency and the publishers understand that, yes, measurement might be a part of it, but I think the engaged attention is what the brands are looking for. The sooner we understand I guess all the rest just follows through of how we get engaged users to the brands is, I guess, if we can figure that out, again, as Jamie mentioned, it's not just a job for the developers or the measurement platforms or the brand itself to come up with ideas. It's a combination of all of them using the strengths and whatever platforms and tools are available in the market.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you all for joining today. Really, really appreciate your time, Jamie, Ax, Sheetal. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. And of course, very special thanks, viewers and listeners, for joining us on Gamesforum Online. That's all we've got time for this week. Hopefully, we'll see you again soon. But thanks again, everyone, and have a lovely day. Thanks all. Bye.
Cheers, John.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Bye.